Hi, my name is Sara Zemikiel. I'm a rising junior. I'm a Bethesda Chevy Chase High School. I'm a summarized intern at Montgomery County Executive Office, and I'm going to be interviewing Mark Elridge. And
Thank you.
So, I know you used to be a teacher, and I was going to ask you about like the education gap between like schools like Bethesda Chevy Chase and Springbrook, and how the graduation rate is so different, and like the issue with that.
It's a big issue.
Yeah.
And this is not new.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been talking about closing the achievement gap for probably 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, we like to talk about it as a crisis. And I like to say if something's a crisis for 30 years, it's not a crisis because you haven't treated it like a crisis. And we have, I think serious gap problems in the county.
Mm-hmm.
And opportunities are obviously different. And a lot of it has to do just the background knowledge of what the kids bring to school, which is pretty much rooted in socioeconomics. I mean, if your parents have, had basically a high school education and not much more, if their work experiences are limited to, the more manual jobs in the world, like working in, retail or working in restaurants and things like that, they may not be exposed to the breadth of ideas and experiences that other people have.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, you've got kids whose parents have multiple college degrees and, they discuss world affairs and everything around the table. And so normal discussions aren't normal in everybody's household. They're just different things people talk about. Some people struggle academically, and I saw this when I was teaching, that, you had a lot of kids who, would come to school hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're coming into school hungry, you're not necessarily in the best frame of mind to learning. Or if your parents are struggling economically and you hear fights, I mean, everybody knows that probably money's the number one thing people fight about. And if people feel like, am I going to be able to pay the rent? When little kids hear those kind of discussions, it's destabilizing for little kids. Little kids it's a situation they have no control over, and they hear their parents saying, you may not have a house. Mm-hmm. So I think it sets people up differently in society for whether or not they're going to be prepared to learn and able to learn. I think that one of the most effective things that we know about education is early childhood education, that kids who have early childhood education opportunities often start school at a level playing field because you can deal with language deficits, you have a chance to socialize and be with other kids. Often, richer opportunities that help kids be ready to, when they come to school, ready and able to learn. And it's not just an academic thing, it's a social thing.
Yeah. I was gonna say that even the education gap is present in predominantly white institutions, and I just think that's even crazier. But I was gonna talk about how there's an active busing system in Montgomery County with Rosemary Hills in Silver Spring that brings kids from Bethesda and stuff. Why is the busing system only active there and not active in other parts?
That's a good question. That goes back a long time, and it was very controversial when it was done, and it wasn't necessarily universally embraced. But I think it's a good model of things that have worked. And there are a couple of other places where schools are split, K to 2 and 3 to 6, and so you're at the same building, but now the K to school and the 3 to 6 schools hold wider populations because they're teaching fewer grades. I like that model. I think it has a lot of use, but people are very busing is not a popular idea, and it makes it hard to deal with socioeconomic differences if you're not going to bus, because obviously people live in places they can afford. And, if you look at Bethesda and what gets built in Bethesda, there's a whole group of people in this county who could never afford to live there. So they live someplace else, and these communities with more resources live here. You wind up totally in different schools. And anytime the school system talks about shifting boundaries or busing kids, we get pushed, or they get pushed back. I'm not in the school system, fortunately.
Yeah.
But they get pushed back immediately.
Yeah. Okay. And
That's a good question.
Yeah. Okay, so another question I had was about, so our Montgomery County has a 32% like of immigrants, and so immigrants is like a huge part of MCPS like schools, and I feel like like we have like already built things for like immigrant students who don't speak English, but the structure of ESOL is so flawed. So is there like, do you guys like ever have a plan to like improve the the program, because like a lot of kids end up getting stuck in ESOL for many years, and even when I moved from private school to Montgomery County, like to an MCPS school, they put me in ESOL immediately, even though I did not know my native language at all, and I only spoke English my whole life.
Yes,
So.
And I've heard this story from other people. This is a real problem. I'm going to get killed, but I'll say bluntly, I mean, the ESOL program here doesn't work very well. When I was a teacher, I was taught 4th grade and then 5th grade. I had students who were in ESOL for 4 or 5 years. There is no way that the ESOL program should take 4 or 5 years to get a kid to be able to know enough to be in a classroom. And the whole idea that somebody who is actually speaking English and doesn't know the language of their parents is put in an ESOL class because of the language of their parents is totally nuts. Yeah. Because you've already learned, and you had already learned how to socialize and talk to people and communicate in English. It wasn't like you didn't know your home language and you weren't speaking English. You were speaking English.
Yeah.
And the fact that that kind of stuff happens, I think, is really wrong. So you're asking really good questions, and I would say I do not control the school system.
That's why I was like kind of hesitant to ask you, but I feel like it's also good to bring up because I feel like the ESOL program holding kids back for 4 to 5 years is like jeopardizing them to improve in English, and like also results in like not a good graduation rate.
Yep.
So
it also affects, even on the precious test scores, which everybody obsesses over. If you never learn English, or it takes you that long to learn English, you're never going to do good on the high stakes tests that the county does. When I was a teacher, I would on occasion succeed in getting somebody sprung from ESOL and get permission to bring them into my class, because I absolutely believe, particularly if this had been done early on, they would have acquired language through their peers.
Yeah.
Because you're out in a playground, or you're in a classroom and you hear the language spoken, you eventually get it. And ESOL is very limited, and I would say it's even more challenging now, because when I was teaching, there was a wave of Asian kids who went through the schools, but then they moved to other parts of the county. Then there was and is a very large concentration of Hispanic learners in the schools, but their parents didn't know English at home. They didn't speak it. You had these kids who were there speaking Spanish. And then we started getting other languages added to the mix. And so how an ESOL teacher can work with you in whatever your native language was, in your case, you didn't even know your native language, I don't know what they did with you. But if you have a class with many different languages being spoken, that can be a real challenge to providing everybody kind of equitable access to the service, because you need to explain things. And I was lucky I knew enough Spanish. Every once in my class would give me a hard time. They would be like, well, you're explaining to the other kids in class in Spanish. That's not fair. We don't understand. So once in a while, I would teach for 10 or 15 minutes in Spanish. And the kids would get really mad and say, well, we don't understand anything you're saying. And I'd say, think about how they feel. I say all day long they don't understand anything I'm saying.
Yeah.
So let me explain things.
Yeah. Well, that's really good, but unfortunately we don't always get teachers like you. So I was also like, do you guys have any ways to contact, not contact, but keep immigrant parents involved with their children's lives at school? The PTA is usually not doesn't consist of a lot of immigrant parents because they don't know, And I know recently you guys started adding more languages in the reports back to parents and stuff. But do you think there's anything teachers can do, or the county can do, to reach out and have more involvement from parents?
So again, no level of the county has the ability to tell the school system what to do.
Yeah.
You know, if there was anything, you know, I would, you know, a question of like, what would you do, something you'd do differently. I wish that the county government had a greater role in the school system, because right now all we're allowed to do is give them money, but we're not allowed to have any say about programs. Nobody comes to us and says, these programs are working and these programs are not working. We're not used for advice. We're just the bank.
Okay.
And but I think you're right, though. I mean, there ought to be more ways, and I do think the school system's got to figure out a better way to handle ESOL than we're handling it here. This cannot be the national model. If it is, then we're all in trouble.
One more question. I'm sorry.
That's
What's
okay.
it called? So, like, obviously we're dealing with climate change, and it's going to stay with, obviously, the younger generation much longer. So is there any precautions, like net zero buildings, that you guys plan on taking?
So we just did our first net zero building. Our new buildings are supposed to be net zero. We're going back through our older buildings, and we're working on replacing HVAC systems, which are the bigger uses, air conditioning and heating systems, which are the biggest users of energy. Changing lights from fluorescence and regular bulbs to what are those things called, LEDs, which use a lot less energy and generate less heat. If those are things we can do, individuals have to help. The county will provide electric buses. Our vehicle fleet will become all electric or all hydrogen driven, one or the other. But if people in their homes don't make the same kind of decisions, we're not going to achieve the goals we have. We're going to put solar on buildings. We'll figure out how we do a better job of doing this. We were just in a meeting today talking to the school system about further expansion of solar on school buildings. But we could solarize everything in the county that was owned by the government, and if the residents don't follow suit, we will never achieve the climate goals. So this has got to become something more than the government. It's got to be all of us understanding that we only get out of this mess if we collectively work together to do it.
Okay. Is there an expectance date for electric buses?
So we're already, rolling them in. We've got we already have a what's it called? A bus depot where we charge buses. We have multiples. The school has electric bus charging already available. The plans are that I think over the next, I forget how many buses they're doing a year, but the school's going to replace all their buses with electric. We're going to replace all our buses with either electric or hydrogen. And we're actually building a facility now where we're going to use electricity from sunlight to turn water into hydrogen, which is really cool. And it's not magic, but it's something that'll get us fuel that we can actually run our buses on. So it's possible, but Montgomery County is not going to save the world.
Yeah.
And so we need people to look at what we do and say, yeah, it's possible to do that. Sometimes, being an example, you're always probably told, you need to be an example, but, we think about it in the personal level. We need to be examples in terms of showing people that you can actually achieve climate goals, that you could build cleaner buildings, you can use cleaner vehicles, and it's feasible and it's within our means to do that, to try to give people the belief or confidence that they can do this themselves. I mean, I put solar on my roof. We're going to talk more about the benefits of solar energy, and that actually, I've been lucky enough that the power company is sending me checks every month. So it's a change, and I think people need to understand what's available to them, and they don't.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you
for talking with me.
I appreciate your questions.
You
Digging into the schools, even though it's not my parameter. It's certainly an important topic, and obviously it's weighing on your mind.
Yes.
And I'm glad it is, actually.
Thank you.